Hi everyone, this is Mr. Fokowski, and today we're going to talk about the rise of political parties. So, we've talked about Federalists and what they tend to favor, most of all, a strong central government. They also tend to favor the wealthy, the elite, manufacturing industries, and most of them are located in city areas, specifically in the New England area. Interestingly enough, they still have somewhat of an allegiance toward England, and some of the more notable Federalists that we've been talking about, John Adams, John Marshall, Hamilton, think about Hamilton's economic plan, and they also tend to be what we call broad constructionalists, meaning that they are supporters of the Elastic Clause. Remember that the Elastic Clause provides Congress with the power to basically do anything that is deemed necessary and proper, very ambiguous, as we've talked about, and that will be used to pass on Hamilton's economic plan. In contrast to the Federalists, you have the Democratic Republicans, which tend to favor the masses as well as support states' rights. Remember the argument between anti-Federalists and Federalists. Basically, the Democratic Republicans support and could be classified as anti-Federalist, but the party overall is known as Democratic Republicans. That's right, Democratic-Republican. Do not think of them as two separate parties, as that will not come until many, many years later. In addition, Democratic Republicans tend to favor France. Very notable Democratic Republicans include Jefferson, Madison. They tend to also support farms, the South. They are very strict constructionalists, meaning that if it's not specifically said in the U.S. Constitution, then it should not be a power, and all those rights should be given to the people and or the states. So that is the major fundamental differences between the Democratic Republicans versus the Federalists. Inevitably, when you have two different political parties, there are going to be issues that are going to come about. Think about what basically separates Republicans today versus Democrats, and how there's a lot of arguments over certain issues. Well, that will occur during the launching of the new nation as well. One event, the French Revolution, as you studied in world history last year, was actually a major issue that divides the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. Federalists, remember, who favor the elite, are very much fearful of an uprising in the country. So they're very much against the revolution. In contrast, Democratic Republicans, who support the masses, are very much in favor of this revolution because it supports the common citizen. Now, where does this come in with U.S. politics? Well, the issue is that the United States made an alliance with France in 1778, which was supposedly supposed to last forever. So Democratic Republicans are favoring it. They think maybe we should get involved. But Washington at this point says, well, the military is very, very weak. The economic system is just beginning, and we're in a lot of debt, and we're politically disunited. So it really wouldn't make sense to get the United States involved in Europe's affairs. Think about some of the reasons why Thomas Paine said that the United States needs to break apart from Great Britain, because we'd be getting dragged into these European wars that Europe tended to have almost every single second, it seemed. So as a result, Washington is going to issue the Neutrality Proclamation. And Washington doesn't consult Congress. He acts unilaterally, meaning he just acts by himself. And this very much outrages the Democratic Republicans. Now, undoubtedly, Washington makes a great argument as to why the United States shouldn't get involved. But also the Neutrality Proclamation demonstrates the United States acting for selfish reasons, because we have nothing to gain out of the French-British conflict. So I think it's sort of the two important reasons why the United States is not getting involved. Certainly if we had more at stake, we might consider going in, but Washington makes some very sound reasons as why we should remain neutral at this point. So the British are still an issue. They are still in the Northwest Territory, and they're enjoying a fur trade. And if you think back to the Treaty of Paris in 1783, Britain was supposed to cede this land. But Britain is still there, so that's sort of a problem. They make an alliance with the Miami Confederacy, which basically comprised of 8 Indian nations. And the problem with that is that if the United States were to send an army, well, the Miami Confederacy acts as a buffer until we get to the British. So the British enjoy this nice buffer, so it protects them. So in 1790 and 1791, the leader of the Miami Confederacy, known as Little Turtle, very much defeats U.S. troops when the United States Army comes in. So by 1794, the United States will regroup under what was known as General Mad Anthony Wayne, will invade once again at the Battle of Fallen Timbers. The only issue for the Miami Confederacy is that they see that they're outnumbered and that they're being overpowered. So when the Miami Confederacy sort of runs to the British asking them for shelter and for protection, the British refuse to protect them, which is very ironic. Again, another example how Native Americans are being taken over and taken advantage of either by the United States or, in this case, Great Britain. As a result, the Native Americans have no choice but to engage in a peace agreement with General Wayne. This will be known as the Treaty of Greenville in 1795. The Confederacy gives up most of the land in the Old Northwest, as you can see in this purple area, and this would be modern-day Ohio. They also give up some territory in Indiana as well. In return, the Native Americans will receive about $20,000 with annual payments of about $9,000. And there was a stipulation that said that they could still hunt off the land. So although this is very much an unequal treaty, the Native Americans believe that because there are some limits on this treaty on the United States, that this would not necessarily decide the fate of the Native Americans, because again they are technically allowed to hunt on this land and they are being paid as a result of their concessions. But we will certainly see how that will be a different issue coming up. And of course there will be more issues here. Great Britain and France are at war once again, no surprise there. Britain wants to basically starve the French as well as the West Indies, so they basically cut off trade with their superior navy. They believe that the United States might assist the French, because think about how the Democratic Republicans were very much in favor of supporting France. So the British begin to seize about 300 merchant ships, and they also begin the policy of impressment. Basically, they would seize not only the items on board, but also the people. So you have American merchants basically being seized. So some Americans immediately want to go to war. They're saying what Great Britain is doing right now basically is a declaration of war. But Hamilton is, again, very fearful, because he says part of my financial system involves trade with Great Britain, and that is critical. So Washington will send out future Chief Justice John Jay to London, and John Jay really doesn't have a lot of cards to play in this situation. So as a result of this negotiation between Jay and Great Britain, the British agreed to leave the Northwest Territory because again, this was on U.S. soil, and this was something they promised back in 1783 under the Treaty of Paris. Britain also said it would pay for seizing these American merchant vessels. But again, the problem with this treaty is that it says nothing about the future. It says nothing in the treaty that Britain would never do this again or not supply the Native Americans with weapons. So as a result, this is not a really great treaty for the United States. In fact, it also forces John Jay to give some ground a little bit by saying that the United States will pay back some debts owed to British merchants for events that happened prior to the French Revolution. Undoubtedly, this favors the North, where, again, you see the vast majority of Federalists living. Think about it. Remember, John Jay is a Federalist himself. Southern planters feel that they are going to have to pay off the share of pre-revolutionary debts, while these Federalist shippers are going to be collecting some of these damages as a result of what happened to their vessels. So as you see in this picture here, you see a number of effigies. This is not a real person, but you have Democratic Republicans not only burning effigies of John Jay, but you also have John Jay being guillotined in effigy as well as hanged. So Democratic Republicans are very, very much upset and irate toward John Jay, and even Washington's popularity takes a nosedive. So fearing that the John Jay Treaty was an alliance with Great Britain, Spain begins to become worrisome of these events. And basically, just like that, the United States will sign a treaty with Spain known as the Pinckney Treaty, which provides the United States with free navigation of the Mississippi, as well as western Florida. Okay, moving on. A new nation, a new president, and John Adams will become president, and you'll see how he has to grapple with a number of foreign affairs issues. So if you look at some of the foreign affairs issues of today, you have everything from the Mexican drug trade, you have everything from Kim Jong-un, Vladimir Putin, AIDS in Africa. So there are a number of different issues going on that the president has to deal with on a regular basis. It's just part of being a president. So in the election of 1796, John Adams will defeat Jefferson, and you'll see that Federalists barely eke it out in this election against the Democratic Republicans. But if you look at this electoral map, you can see the pink displaying the Federalists as well as the blue displaying Jefferson and the Democratic Republicans. You can see how it's very much split between North and South, and where the respective political parties basically have their base. So one of the first issues that John Adams is going to have to deal with is with the fallout from the Jay Treaty, not in the United States so much, but with France. France is extremely upset concerning the Jay Treaty because they say it violates the Franco-American Treaty of 1778. So as a result, the French begin to seize American merchant vessels, similar to what the British were doing. And as a result, France again is very irate, and they're even refusing to have any envoys come to Paris. So John Adams at this point, trying to continue Washington's proclamation in terms of neutrality, is trying to avoid war at all costs. So what he does is he sends 3 men over to France, one of them including future Chief Justice John Marshall. And when they arrive, they are secretly approached by 3 men known as X, Y, and Z, who demand a loan of millions of dollars, along with a bribe of $250,000 just to talk with the Prime Minister. Well, even though this is a European custom, this is not an American custom. So the American trio, who are sent over to negotiate some type of settlement with France, refuses because they're saying, well, even if we pay France, there's no assurances of a settlement. So of course negotiations are going to break down, and John Marshall, amongst the other 2, are going to be hailed a hero from backing away. But again, this does not solve the issue going on with France. So consequently, we actually have an undeclared naval war. This is known as a quasi-war that lasts between 1798 and approximately the year 1800. Many people don't know about this and always think about France as an alliance, but at one point we basically had a war. It was called a quasi-war because it was like a semi-war. It wasn't like a full declared war by any means. But war preparations begin. We'll have the Navy Department created, the U.S. Marine Corps reestablished. We'll have tens of thousands of men being authorized for a new army. So for about 2.5 years, you have an undeclared naval war. The United States is very successful in capturing about roughly 80 armed French vessels, and again, we're almost very close to full-scale war. Now, Talleyrand, who was the French Prime Minister, also didn't want to get into another war. Keep in mind that they were already fighting with Great Britain. They're always involved in a number of wars. So after about 2.5 years of undeclared naval warfare, the Convention of 1800 will convene. And basically, it officially ends this military alliance. Again, think back to the Franco-American alliance, which said that the United States and France will be aligned forever. In addition, France will agree to pay damages of American shippers. And so this ultimately shows how John Adams, as their second president, pushed for peace and thought about how important peace was for our nation's beginning. Certainly, he could have gone to war and have taken New France in North America, but he avoided war, and this would eventually lay down the process for eventually purchasing Louisiana, the Louisiana Purchase, under Thomas Jefferson. So if there was this full-out war, it would be very unlikely that the Louisiana Purchase would have been sold to Jefferson, and think about how that may have changed the course of the United States. So at this time, there's a lot of anti-sentiment, and this has been the case throughout history, depending on who we're at war with or who we're not getting along with. So in 1798, during this undeclared quasi-war, people refused to listen to French music. In the 1940s, when we're fighting against Germany, sauerkraut is changed to Liberty cabbage. And then in 2003, when the French refused to support us in Iraq, we changed it from French toast and French fries to freedom fries and freedom toast.